Thank you. Hey, welcome everybody again to our FAC Policy and Practice Subcommittee meeting. So here on March 9th, 2023. So looking forward to a good discussion here today. And the first thing I'm going to do is, before we get started, is I'm going to do a quick roll call here. And just taking a look and see how we have. And I'll just read off the names on the list here. So we got Luke, we got Richard, I don't see Leslie. Antonio, we got you. I don't see Mark, and I don't see Mamie. And Emlyn, we got you. Jenny, I don't see Jenny. I think Jenny had a conflict today, by the way.
I think we also heard that Leslie was going to be on a plane, but I may be mixing the apples and oranges.
Yeah, you're right. Leslie and Jenny. Got you, Steve. And Stacy, don't see Stacy yet. Nigel. And Nigel has a conflict till 4, so he'll be joining right around 4 o'clock. And Anish, I see you. David, I see you. And
I'm here. I might have a conflict at 3:30 if I'm pinged about it, but okay. So just letting you know.
All righty. And then I did hear from Kimberly earlier on, so she is out of pocket for a couple of days here. So I think we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to turn this over to Steve and Luke to take it from here.
And I think today Luke is the man. So take it away.
Luke is the man. All right, Luke.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you all. I will keep it brief. I'd like to thank you guys for joining us again today. I think we've had a couple of good weeks of progress. We've settled on some coalescing around a couple of priorities. Steve and I, if we have time towards the end, input on the path to recommendations. We plan to use today as a bit of a working session. Steve is going to take us through single-use plastics and the journey we've taken to get here today, and kind of how we need to get to a recommendation. But first, and most importantly, we are very lucky to have another member of the committee who's the chair of the acquisition workforce, Professor Nicole Darnall, here today. She's going to be talking to us first about a fantastic piece of work that she did that was just released recently, the Sustainable Public Procurement 2022 Global Review. As our first guest, I think we really look forward to hearing from you and what your group and your committee put together in that fantastic report that was shared with us just a couple of weeks ago. So I guess I'll hand off the mic to you now, Nicole.
Great. Let me go ahead and share my screen. We can get started. My technology is a little bit old, and so the screen share generally takes a couple of seconds longer than for regular people. Let's see. And there we go. Let me minimize a few things so I can see the slides. 1 second. Yep. All right. I think I'm set. All right, so I really welcome the opportunity to talk with you today about the findings that we discovered as part of undertaking the 2022 Global Review of Sustainable Public Procurement. This is a United Nations report that was put forward. ASU was the lead research institution that was part of this. And it was in my role as director of the Sustainable Purchasing Research Initiative at ASU that I got involved. So let me offer some highlights and some background on what this report is. UNEP started reporting on sustainable public procurement in 2013. They then put forward a 2017 report before the 2022 report. I think that the nature of the 2022 report really reflects the changing landscape of sustainable public procurement. So in 2017, that report was 60 pages long. The 2022 report, just the middle of it, the guts of the report, was more than 200 pages long. because there's so much more to report on today, including an assessment towards meeting the UN SDG 12.7. We included sections related to how the private sector engages in sustainable procurement. We looked at the broader role of international organizations, academia, and networks in helping to facilitate SPP. And then we really expanded on our understanding of the drivers and barriers and needs around SPP. So with respect to the research methodology, we conducted a national government questionnaire across 45 countries. The United States was one of the countries that reported there. We had a stakeholder survey of 322 stakeholders globally, representing 92 different countries. So when I say this is a broad brush view of what sustainable public procurement looks like, it's very broad brushed. We undertook a literature review of more than 200 articles and professional reports. The report itself underwent peer review by 14 different experts in the field. And then we engaged in semi-structured interviews across 26 different experts. My team was involved, and we ran the stakeholder survey and the semi-structured interviews. We were loosely involved in the literature review, although the primary task was internal to United Nations. You can see all of the icons at the bottom here. There were many different organizations that touched with the construction of this report. And I say this because you may have certain questions that are asked, and by virtue of how the work was parsed out, I may or may not be able to answer that question, but I can put you in contact with the individual who can answer it specifically. So what did we learn? First, we learned that there is no single formula for sustainable procurement success, but many pathways. And we identified 9 recommendations to equip decision makers and public procurement experts, and primarily to encourage additional discussion. So amongst us and our committees within GSA, we refer to all of this as acquisition and the acquisition process. Outside of the federal government, it's largely referred to as sustainable procurement or sustainable purchasing. And it's just a different terminology that's used, but it still embodies the full suite of activities within the acquisition lifecycle. So recommendation number 1 is to make sustainable procurement criteria and guidelines mandatory. That the current status across the national governments that we surveyed, 62% of them have developed some sort of criteria or guideline around at least one prioritized product or service category. So I want to emphasize this because that's a low bar, at least one service or product category, about 2/3. But less than 1/3 actually have mandatory applications for these specifications. And why this matters is that voluntary only goes so far. And we saw this across all levels of government that we looked at the local level, at the meso level, the state, provincial level, but also the national level too. And so if we're really serious about increasing SPP adoption and consistent adoption, we need to get serious about backing it with specific policies. It sends a strong signal to the procurers on the front lines about what is needed and what's expected. This is the strong signal that the markets need to see in order to shift their development in important ways. It helps mitigate risks. And finally, it helps change the organization culture and mobilizes action within organizations. And let me just pause and say, listen, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to jump in. We don't need to just plow all the way through. I've got 9 of these. Yes, Steve.
Hey, Nicole, one comment is your screen seems to be cutting off a little bit of the slide. So I wonder if you just go back to just the edit mode might be better. That way it won't be cutting it off. Yeah.
Yeah, tell me, Boris, what part's getting cut off?
The one to the right, like where it says sustainable procurement, I could only see up to about the R, procure, the second R.
It looks like you're at about 150%.
Okay, let me see. You know what? Let me stop sharing and I'll try and reshare. And we'll see if that does it, did that change anything?
Yes,
Okay.
that
Look
did
at
it.
that.
That was solution.
Sometimes just doing it over is enough. Steve, did
Perfect.
you have another question?
Yeah, so, and again, I think this is kind of a pervasive theme, but if you can speak to it throughout, I thought it was a good time to raise it now because of the way the slide is posed. One of the things that I found very interesting about the report is it's a global survey, but there's very many regional themes. And of course, we're very focused on the United States, but at the federal level, distinguished from state and local. And so, for example, on this slide, you mention Europe, you mention Asia, you don't mention the United States. So I guess one of my questions going forward is, anytime you have observations on where the United States is particularly behind or actually doing something great, that would be great. And in addition, I'm really kind of curious, since you were deeper into it, any observations as to why certain countries and certain regions? Is it the scale and diversity of the country is smaller, easier? Is it leadership? Is it nature of the economy? Is it culture? Is it industry? Any observations along those lines? I'd be fascinated to hear.
Absolutely. I think we know what's happening in the US, whether there are mandatory applications or criteria. It's in part why it's not up here. And then that's just one country as it compares to the suite of those in Europe and Asia. I also want to say that we included a number of African countries within the conversation and numerous less developed countries, and that's going to play out in some of the findings too. They tend to focus more on the social side of sustainability than they do on the environmental side. But I will carry on. Okay, number 2 is to shift from low-cost procurement to value for money procurement. This is a really important rhetorical shift, that value for money procurement includes social environmental considerations embedded within criteria, that it provides a more accurate assessment of the true cost of goods and services throughout the product life cycle. And it's going to spur market competitiveness for companies that are advancing more sustainable products. So an example, and this is in the UK, and it's a legislative example, the Social Value Act of 2012 requires government to explicitly evaluate social value when awarding most major contracts. Here, again, moving beyond low-cost procurement to value for money procurement. And Tony, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. My question actually was really from the prior slide when you were referencing that so many of the countries had adopted at least one product service code category. Was there much consistency in terms of themes of areas that were commonly points of focus?
For the criteria areas,
Correct.
I know we dug into that, Antonio. I do not remember the specifics.
Okay.
That was the big survey that we ran. We just had so many data tables associated with that. I cannot remember the numbers offhand. What I can say is that for most of the countries that were focused on environmental criteria, what popped up as most salient related to issues around energy and climate change. Okay. So especially products that had high carbon footprints like construction materials or vehicle fleets, those tended to be the focal areas. But I can direct you to the specific table within the report to get you that information if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you so much. That would be great.
Yeah, sure. So item number 3, and this connects to so many of the different aspects of the work that we're undertaking, emphasize training, capacity building, and incentives. That procurement managers don't always see the full value of sustainable public procurement. And so this is where training is so important, and training that focuses on value for money procurement. So off here to the right is a quote from one of our expert stakeholders. People are self-driven, and training enables them to pursue SPP with confidence. We need to think internally about recruitment as well. We need to value sustainability expertise when we're hiring, at the point of hiring, so that organizations can quickly enhance their capabilities and capacities around sustainability. Additionally, we need to think about vendor training. This is especially helpful for small and diverse businesses so that they can compete for government contracts. And then finally, it's important to think about aligning the incentives within the organization, that there is inherently a perceived risk associated, either real or not. There's a perceived risk associated with SPP decisions. So it's important to align internal recognitions and rewards, to think creatively about spurring innovation internally. So within the US, City of Phoenix is an example. They have competitions across departments about the extent to which they can shift their spend towards more sustainable product. But then externally, there are organizations like ICLEI and the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council that offer awards and recognitions for individuals that are really trying to push the sustainability needle. All right, number 4 is to enhance reputation for sustainability. This recommendation, it doesn't apply to everyone, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. The idea here is that sustainable governments are gaining more recognition. They're getting rated on Forbes, they're getting rated in Condé Nast and other different publications for their sustainability efforts. And the notion is that sustainability can improve the public image and reputation of an organization. It helps influence new business decisions, tourism, and other sorts of stakeholder interests. It also demonstrates just an overall commitment to sustainability that increases trust and goodwill with stakeholders. So the critical feature here is to be transparent, that when policies are developed, they need to be publicly available. They need to be communicated widely. Information about metrics and goals and progress towards meeting those goals need to be communicated. And this is going to come up as being extremely relevant at the end of the presentation, because most public organizations that are doing great things within this space aren't very good about talking about it. It's not enough just to do the great things. It's super important to also communicate it, because that's where the goodwill comes into play. And this is where we create this virtuous cycle from critical stakeholders to continue the momentum. Number 5, advance all aspects of sustainability across the procurement lifecycle. This was very relevant to our international focus. Different countries are focusing on different things. So for instance, social purchasing is a strong platform that we discovered for environmental purchasing and vice versa. In developing countries, sustainable purchasing tends to focus more on small and local businesses, especially those from disadvantaged groups. There's a lot to learn from what's happening in these other countries. They're using creative tendering processes to allow vendors to collaborate for large procurement contracts. And they're promoting purchases from businesses that prioritize, this is interesting, human labor over automation. So they're connecting their sustainability goals with their economic development goals towards full employment. Within OECD countries, sustainable procurement tends to focus on the environmental impacts of purchasing, in part because they're somewhat easier to measure, quite frankly. What we suggest is that leveraging the efforts from whatever that initial focal point to build on to consider the full suite of sustainability impacts is really important to support sustainability more generally across the entire procurement lifecycle. Number 6, leverage sustainable purchasing to build resilience in the face of crisis. This was a very unexpected finding for us and a very unexpected recommendation. That based on our large stakeholder survey, we came to learn that many governments are using SPP to enhance purchasing resilience and economic development, to promote supply chain resilience by leveraging the power of small and local business. So here's one of the quotes from our expert stakeholders. In the wake of COVID-19, we see sparks of hope. This recovery is changing the model of the standard economy. The potential for SPP is significant. 63% of buyers and 71% of suppliers report that sustainable purchasing actually helped them endure the COVID crisis. So we stepped into the research believing that organizations would roll back their focus on sustainable procurement in the wake of COVID. It was the opposite. Those that had focused on sustainable procurement were better able to weather the crisis. And this is exactly what we are hoping to see, and why procurement is so critical to connect with mitigating supply chain risks. Supply chain resilience increases as SPP implementation matures because we have richer indicators, we have stronger relationships with our suppliers, we have more diverse supplier pools, and we have a pathway for nurturing suppliers to help them become more sustainability performers. And we see examples across the globe of where this has happened. Number 7.
I'm sorry, could you just go back for 1 second, Nicole? On number 6,
Yes.
how well correlated is the resilience issue to the binary that we often hear in the United States of the difference between mitigation and adaptation? So how much does resilience overlie adaptation, or is it more broad?
So I think I need some more specifics and how you're thinking about COVID and how this connects to supply chain.
What I was asking more is that, for example, at DoD, in the Defense Department, the biggest procuring agency, when they talk about addressing climate change through procurement, they talk about adapting to climate change and then attempting to mitigate it.
Right.
And what we've often found is that in discussions with groups, resilience and adaptation are often lumped together, but I don't think it correlates very well. So I was just kind of curious if you had any reactions.
Super great question. We did not try to parse that out. So within this report, we don't get at that at all. I think it's very critical moving forward to think about that because, well, there are a couple of things here: mitigation, risk, reducing risks, as opposed to getting ahead of a problem because it provides greater value to the organization. They're also just very different starting points. And I don't think that should get lost in the conversation of supply chain resilience. So number 7 is to integrate sustainable purchasing into e-procurement to measure outcomes. This seems so obvious. It's so obvious, but yet it's remarkable how little integration is taking place. So the first thing I want to say is this really partners with recommendation number 2 related to training and incentives. So the benefits of this is that you're reducing costs of finding sustainable goods and services if sustainable purchasing is integrated into the e-procurement system. It raises the profile of sustainable products or services so that they become the default decision for purchasing. This is the potential that SF tool and other sorts of mechanisms that are available at the federal level could potentially touch with respect to the end of the life cycle of the procurement life cycle. Doesn't really get at the beginning of the procurement life cycle, but definitely at the end. It also can help organizations integrate sustainability into the tenders, so the e-tendering process. There's a possibility of using artificial intelligence towards developing contract language, to sharing best practices around the RFPs and the e-tenders in contracting. It helps manage what you measure. So you're more easily able to track spend and to monitor SPP progress. This is what Julia Wolf has done out in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She's taken the e-procurement process as a platform to develop dashboards where you can monitor in real time where spend is going, what percentage of total spend is going towards the more sustainable options. It also creates a mechanism for incentivizing sustainable purchasing behavior because you're better able to track what's happening. And because you're enhancing transparency, it reduces potential for corruption in the procurement process. And again, stepping into this, we thought, this just seems obvious, but yet only 24% of national governments are measuring their sustainable public procurement outcomes. So how do you go about doing that? Rely on the existing systems that you have, but build them out in a way so it's useful to monitor progress. So we're talking here about customized e-procurement add-ons, which are at, and I've forgotten the terminology within GSA, because there are a couple of these add-ons already that can be embedded within the existing system, developing dashboards to track sustainability performance, and then including product lists, sustainable product lists, and online databases of those purchasing options. Make these things required. Number 8, participate in knowledge sharing networks. The benefits here are that you're not having to reinvent the wheel. You're bringing together purchasing professionals from different regions and different sectors to learn from each other, to learn from their innovations, their failures, and best practices around sustainable purchasing. The idea is to avoid the hurdles that have already been encountered by others, and also to develop awards and recognitions to help accelerate SPP implementation. In the acquisition workforce subcommittee meeting yesterday, we learned about how there were these regional councils. There was a GSA, goodness, what was it called, Boris? It was the GSA Environmental Council, wasn't it?
Yeah, Sustainability Council.
The CSO Council.
Yeah, and it exists within the Public Building Service of GSA, which is a big part of GSA, but it's a separate organization from the piece that we've been talking to.
So the idea is that you have a council at the higher level to help create momentum within the organization, but then you have regional councils as well. And we talked about this notion of developing tiger teams where, based on procurement priorities, you can assemble people very quickly around specific issues. That's within the organization, but it's also important to learn from individuals outside the organization through different networks that are there. So some networks that are relevant to the US include ICLEI, the Responsible Purchasing Network, and the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, among others. And then the final recommendation that we had was to enhance supplier engagement. Suppliers can be really important allies in determining the success of sustainable procurement. They help inform us about sustainable options that we wouldn't otherwise know about and create avenues to increase sustainable procurement. The idea here is looking towards industry as a collaborator towards success. But this is a very different starting point from how we typically engage with the private sector, that oftentimes we view this as an arm's length distance to avoid appearances of corruption or misappropriation funds. What I can tell you is within this report and within the 8 countries that we have studied, more than 4,000 local governments, this one of the 5 most important determinants of sustainable procurement success was thinking innovatively about engaging vendors in the conversation, to learn from them, to exchange information. So it's important to be clear about the organization's sustainability goals in order to do this. Give suppliers sufficient time to respond for information requests so that they can engage early and fairly. So it's not just a single vendor that's getting tapped on the shoulder, and to seek information from these critical stakeholders. Boris, I see your hand up.
I was only going to emphasize, when we had our focus group earlier in the week, one of our guests talked exactly about this point here, how he has learned from vendors about sustainable solutions and done a lot of education from the industry side. So I thought it was a really interesting insight that just fits right into this recommendation.
I have heard this time and time again from our local governments, and it's very interesting. So City of Tempe, I'll provide an anecdotal example. City of Tempe has a primary contract with a vendor for cleaning supplies. And they said, we just don't even know if our vendor, and we're under contract for a long period of time with this vendor, we don't know if they offer sustainable products. They already have the contract. They picked up the phone, they called them. Turns out they have a whole suite within their database of green leaf labels that they had no idea existed. The City of Tempe didn't. And City of Tempe simply said, can we just make those the top items that pop up in the search for products so that they become the default? And they said, so the contractor said, it's just a flip of the switch. That's all we need to do. So there are so many examples of very, very simple ways to engage vendors in a way that doesn't compromise our ability to maintain independence from a vendor, and really helps us meet the specific goals that we're looking to meet with respect to sustainability. It requires a willingness, however, for us to have that conversation, because it may be a conversation that we're not used to having within procurement. But to your point, Boris, you're right. That was punctuated very strongly on Tuesday in the Acquisition Workforce Subcommittee meeting. All right. So monitoring and measuring, I've mentioned this before. If you don't measure it, you don't manage it. You need mechanisms to measure and monitor. So despite the advances, so remember, we went from the 60-page document to a 200-page document, not because we just wanted to talk more. It's because there was so much more to say that was happening. But yet we've only seen a 5% increase in the proportion of national governments that are monitoring sustainable purchasing. This was a surprise. And then only 1/3 of those national governments that monitor SPP are measuring the sustainable public procurement benefits. From my point of view, this is a missed opportunity. Communicating with our primary stakeholders about the big wins that we're making, big and small, it's huge. It's huge for organization change, maintaining the momentum internal to the organization. It's huge in engaging in the political conversations that ultimately will be had around this topic. It's important to be as transparent as possible about why this matters. And if we're not measuring it, we can't do that. So just to conclude, and this is my last slide, sustainable procurement across the countries that we studied encompasses a whole variety of strategies well beyond just greener products. They incorporate the full range of programmatic activities that affect every step of the typical procurement lifecycle, just as what GSA is hoping to do. They require strategic engagement of stakeholders, including vendors, for success. Whoops, let me go back. Changing the typical procurement strategies requires a focus on change management. And with this, we need buy-in from leadership and policy. So one of the discussions within the acquisition workforce is about training at the highest levels first, the importance of getting the buy-in at the highest levels first. We saw this within the United Nations report. Monitoring and measurement of SP outcomes, creating technical changes needed, connecting e-procurement and other technologies to help us measure and monitor progress, and then shifting organizational cultures through training, incentives, and other internal factors that really help increase momentum and make sustainable purchasing the default. And then, of course, UNEP pledges to continue doing what it's doing, and they're continuing to support this along the way to different countries, to local governments across all levels. And that's what I got.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. I appreciate you doing this for us on short notice. I think we're going to have a couple of questions, but I'd like to say I think the work that you and the committee did are is really impressive and amazing, and almost a bit of a precursor to the work that we're doing here on these committees, right? We have had a lot of discussions about benchmarking and looking at best practices in the public and the private sector and what's everybody else doing. And then lo and behold, you guys have delivered a thorough and rigorous document that kind of laid out what the global view is on what we're trying to recommend here. So, my hope is that our committee can benefit from this, and maybe there are things that we can incorporate and adopt and build on and learn from. I'll just start with a couple of concepts that hit home for me, and that is really two things. The enhance the reputation for sustainability. I think what we have learned, or what I have learned, is that the GSA already does an amazing amount of good work. And that was a surprise to me when we started digging, and it shouldn't have been a surprise. The great work that they have done and are doing, and all the bits and pieces, just have not reached the right ears, and they're not getting the benefits of all that and maximizing the benefits of all that work. I see you nodding your head. I think you've come to the same conclusion.
Well, here's the thing, and we see this all the time. We're so focused on getting the work done that we stop short with that equally important effort of communicating the good work.
Right.
It's a forest for the trees, or it's not a forest for the trees. It's that if a tree falls in the forest sort of analogy. Everyone internally, or at least a portion of the people internally, get it. But if what we're trying to do is create a change management model and embed sustainability and make it the default, this needs to be transparent throughout and communicated. I would say it's impossible when you're engaging in change management to under communicate what the objectives are and how you're meeting those goals.
Totally agree. Totally agree. The other concept that I think we probably need to talk about more as a committee here is the advancing all aspects of sustainability across the procurement life cycle. I don't think we haven't really talked about it in terms of a life cycle. We've talked about the bits and the pieces, but there are elements of recommendations that we're coming to. Some of it will be in the needs development. Some of it will be in the procurement planning. Some of it will be during the acquisition process, during the evaluation process and evaluation criteria. And some other elements may come into play after a contract is awarded, and performance, measuring, monitoring, making it possible for cooperative government purchasing and state entities to pick and choose the most sustainable options after award. I mean, there are things, we haven't really talked about it in that way, but that is, that's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, I think, when we try to coalesce around some final recommendations. Let's start with Richard. He's had his hand up for a few minutes. Richard, floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicole. That was great. I really enjoyed that presentation. But I had a question, and I'm coming at this from the IT space. Specifically, the IT industry worldwide is disproportionately reliant upon supply chain sourcing, specifically from China, but also from Vietnam and other areas. And in the early 90s, I had the misfortune or the fortune to lead negotiating teams to set up those factories and OEM relationships in China for a major US OEM, and can tell you that these issues and contractual approaches were not on the radar at all. And I also don't believe that maintaining reliance on overseas suppliers such as China is going to result in sustainable procurement measures. They don't give a fig about this stuff, in my opinion, and based on my experience. So I have a statement and a question, and the statement is: I think the single greatest maneuver to embed sustainable procurement would be to disengage from China and onshore to the U.S. and to the European Union, where responsible oversight and compliance rules are mature in the fashion you've identified. And my second question is that even possible given the incredible supply chain reliance of this specific industry sector on overseas supply chains and outsourcing?
Yeah. No. I mean, the Pandora's box has opened. Globalization is here. Now, we will be able to put some parameters around that, and some of the manufacturing is going to come back to the United States just based on the different executive orders that are moving out, but the executive orders also change based on who's in office. I think that the broader solution is going to be defined by technologies that have a better handle at assessing supply chains and supply chain risk. So companies like EcoVadis and MakerSite that are helping organizations really wrap their hands around broader ESG risks related specifically to supply chain. So EcoVadis has a rating system based on a whole suite of different suppliers that are in its database, and it's using artificial intelligence, but also different surveys to curate information about what's happening within supply chains. EcoVadis is probably one of the oldest companies within this space. MakerSite is one of the biggest. The field is becoming more interesting. And I think that because of the explosion in ESG, which forces us to consider the social impact of our operational decisions, both internal to the organization, but external to the organization, we have a small window of hope for beginning to assess these things. But to your point, this is just assessment. So we can identify the risks that are out there. It's not necessarily going to change the way the business is engaged, but it'll provide us with the information to decide whether we want to work with that vendor again. At the end of the day, if you purchase an electronic, that microchip hails from somewhere in China, and probably some child's hands have touched aspects of that. And so it's only going to come with us becoming more serious with the regulations internally, where companies are going to be required to disclose information about how products are made and who's involved in the production. We're going to start seeing the change. I'm hopeful, but it's a giant that we're having to wrestle with.
Thank you. Mark, looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Luke. Nicole, I really got to say I'm impressed with your presentation. You really tied in a lot of loose ends. And the one that struck me most had this measurability component to it. When I was in Glasgow, I had challenged the university to come up with some way to equate that to some kind of a savings. And I also talked to some of the executives at Lever Brothers who said, well, we'll put a carbon rating on a tube of toothpaste, let's say. And then somehow that can be tied to a sustainable savings. But I think the key here is to make this all automated. Don't make somebody do math on a piece of paper on what that results in, because it's not going to happen. So I'm hoping that we can reach a point, maybe with a UPC symbol or some kind of a quick reference code that can do that for us, and then tally it up, roll it up, and we'll have it each year. Thank you.
I'm going to invoke the words of Holly Elwood here. I'm a big fan. She said, our task is to make it drop dead easy. That's it. We have to figure that out. That's how we're going to be successful. Make it drop dead easy. And it likely means we're going to have to take a multi-pronged approach. So SF tool, I think, can help. There are other mechanisms that can help, but also developing policies whereby before any item that goes into sam.gov has to meet certain criteria, sustainability criteria first. So then whoever reviews what's in sam.gov doesn't have to worry about whether it meets the specific sustainability criteria that they should be looking for. It's getting early enough in the acquisition process to make this drop dead easy. And it's going to require a multi-pronged approach.
Thank you. Adina, you've got your hand raised. Feel free.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the question about IT and globalization. So regarding things coming back to the United States or production coming back to the United States, I just want to bring our attention to this administration did run a report through and be focused on supply chain risks that was made public. Within that, also things to consider in terms of changes to market regarding, I guess, things in that particular sector. So for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, that also relies on the president invoked the Defense Production Act for certain components, for like say solar panels, for example. So we're trying to bring that market back. If you read the IRA text, it kind of gets into bringing up basically subsidizing American industry to make it more competitive with the Chinese industry. It's about a 30% difference. In terms of traditional IT, you know, so the other thing let's talk non-traditional first. The other thing is to look at electric vehicles in the United States. We're leading compared to other nations, especially with development and basically like the infrastructure piece of it. So that's an industry that I would say is fair to stay within the US. AI development as well within the US. The only one that I would say that, yes, there's a concern potentially is when you start talking about hardware, but the more environmental regulations centered on that hardware, the more I would say that you could see a shift in market. So I wouldn't just say that we're globalized and that the American, you know, manufacturing is knocked out of the water. I actually think we're kind of at the beginning of you know, like a green, you know, revival kind of here in the United States regarding the manufacturing and the goods that we're offering the rest of the world. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, but all that's publicly available.
I agree, Adina. I mean, I think we have enormous promise, but as you mentioned, other countries have taken the lead in subsidizing these targeted areas in a way that the US has not. It would be terrific if we saw that level of support across a range of different products, but I agree. So my comments are very broad sweeping. We can find success stories here. They definitely exist.
Thank you. Amlan, I'd like to get your reaction and takeaways if you're available.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very, I loved this presentation, particularly because within Federal Highways, there's been an effort to look at what's happening in terms of green public procurement across different countries. Of course, we're looking primarily infrastructure arena, and we're looking at very specific procurement details related stuff, but this bigger picture of some of the trends and the analyses are very helpful. So one thing that I'm thinking about, and I was kind of, as I was hearing the 7 or 8 points you had, is like, one is with the technology. I mean, the e-ticketing, you know, because we've been seeing the same thing in construction, is that we've been doing e-ticketing and how that is lining up very well with like our EPDs and, you know, and the stuff that we're doing towards asking for life cycle assessment based information in green procurement. And so there was definitely, you know, there was some echoes there. The need for communication and you cannot under communicate, and this is so true. And you know, you pointed out earlier, because right now there has been so much work, especially with IRA implementation, in terms of EPA with GSA and FHWA, all, you know, working together, looking at, you know, the green construction materials, or the low carbon construction materials program, and how that is, you know, it's brought together so many different communities working in this area. But at the same time, we're also finding out how in some cases we have situations where part of our organization doesn't know what the other part is doing, and that's again not because of any other intent other than that we've just been busy doing what we're doing and failing to communicate. So I mean, that was definitely another very critical and very important echo I heard in terms of the social aspects and what you're hearing from you know, more developing countries. I think we're heading in that direction too, looking at, especially for infrastructure, where highways have such an important impact on the social fabric of wherever they pass through, essentially. And so you know, how that gets integrated, how the social aspects get integrated into procurement is going to be very interesting to see. But I mean, you know, based on everything, the big picture, it's fantastic work. The big picture you've put together, I'm hearing a lot of echoes. Again, I don't know everything that is happening in some of the other domains that were discussed, you know, especially electronics, and being able to weave all of that under this umbrella, I think would be fantastic for this. It was a great direction forward for this committee to work on.
Thanks. Your comments raise a couple of points for me. So I said at the beginning that the work that we've undertaken, the intention is to open up a dialogue discussion and it's real, because if you look at the recommendations, they're very high level, broad brush recommendations. The work that we're undertaking in the GAP FAC is taking something at a high level and making it real and asking, how do we implement something like this? What are the next level steps? And I think the devil's in the details, and that's what's going to make our task a little bit more difficult. But related to communication, as you were talking, it got me thinking about an important point. We fail in two areas of communication. One is communicating our wins, but the other is communicating our interim goals, our shorter term goals. We tend to focus on the big goals, net zero by 2050. Well, what are our year 2 and year 5 and year 7 goals that are going to get us there? Because that's what really is what helps create the momentum internally within workforces. It's very difficult cognitively to look towards 2050 and become inspired by that. In order to be inspired, we need more intermediate goals. And so as you think about your work as a policy committee, I would suggest thinking about establishing interim goals is going to be really important for creating momentum internally.
Mm-hmm. That's actually, if I may just quickly add to that thought a little bit, it may be useful for us to maybe even start putting together a roster of like what are the immediate short-term actions that are being taken in different fields, and what policies are being formed. Like based on IRA, there is so much implementation that is happening, and it's all kind of halfway through. Right now we're in the implementation phase, but like what are the aspects that are being affected, and like where is that going? I think that would be pretty cool. Thank you.
Great. Antonio, we'd like to hear from you if you're willing to share. Thanks, Antonio.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I thought one great presentation, a lot of good information in it. I was going to say one thing first, but I just want to kind of bridge back in on this intermediate goals. I thought that was a really good point, Nicole, that, sometimes we have this really big, it's kind of like the moonshot goal we're trying to get there. But, no one just gets to the moonshot, on day one or activity one. It's a series of sometimes really micro steps that are taking place that fit into a tactic and a strategy that lead us there. So that was, I thought, like really, really, like I'll be quoting you on that one, like you were quoting the other lady on Make It Drop Dead Easy. So the other part that really jumped out to me was just the focus on, even in developing countries where you would assume they have a bigger bridge between the small, less established firms and the big ones. Like I feel like there's probably less of a middle in those markets. And they intentionally went for a lot of work in that lower, kind of underserved, less developed marketplace to try to make sure that their production was going to be effective or be impacting across the full spectrum. I would have not expected that to be the case. I would have thought they went to the top, 8% or whatever the market was, and drove everything that way, and then dragged everybody else along, just as a result of it. So I thought that was a really interesting statement, and one, certainly worth taking note of when you compare it to the capacity that I think we have within the United States, being more broad and strong at that smaller level. Just thinking about things in our SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, Small Business Technology Trade Research, the STTR programs, that often are really good places where those kind of innovative solutions come from. Some of them are not through small business, but a lot of them really are. And some of them are very, very small fledgling small businesses. Somebody who's just got a great innovative idea can jump in and get funding to be able to start their particular prototype, develop it, build it, and ultimately take it to commercialization status. So those are my couple of comments.
I think inevitably this is what happens when you focus on value for money procurement rather than low cost procurement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I undertook these interviews, and I apologize, we did these interviews in May and June of last year, so I can't always remember which country I'm referring to, but it was a country in West Africa one of the stakeholders we interviewed, she said, you know, we have an employment problem here. And the way to really make sustainability work is to align sustainability with creating jobs for individuals within the community. And not only is it about economic development, that's how we're going to create support in our communities for the work that we're undertaking. And it's all positioned with it from the point of view of value for money.
Yeah. Well, and you're creating a natural buy-in at that point. People understand that they get it. There's a connection point there. I did have one last question too. You know, at one point you spoke to the fact that there were other countries who were sort of further ahead. Maybe they've had a unified vision around sustainability for a longer period of time. Are there any that like really stand out as ones that are really, you know, on the forefront of this?
Yeah. I think some obvious choices are going to be in Western Europe. Mm-hmm. So we have examples in Norway and Sweden. Japan's often called out as an example, same as South Korea. You know, here's the thing though, Antonio, I mean, and it really strikes to the limitations of some of the work that was involved in the survey. The survey was very broad brush. Remember, we were asking about mandatory criteria for at least one item. You know, it's a low bar. Yeah. I think that what we really need are in-depth case studies of so-called leaders to really begin determining what the causal mechanisms are internally. That we need to move beyond the existing surveys that we've done. It's sort of like the work of this committee. We've got the broad recommendations. Now we've opened the door. It's time for us to get the work done and to figure out how to implement it based on this broader knowledge that we know. We see what's happening globally, but I think we need many more rich examples of those best practices so that we can help others understand how they can blaze their own path forward.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
I don't see any more hands, but I would like to call on David. I think he was active in the chat. David, do you want to share your takeaways? David must be on another call. How about you, Anish?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to react to the point about resilience in supply chains and that co-benefit of sustainable procurement. And kind of build off of what Adina was mentioning about the Inflation Reduction Act programs. So we know that there's money for public agencies to spend on green materials, and I come from the building sector, so there's a lot of money for low carbon materials. And so as we think about this committee's work on policy and practice, it would be interesting to think about, you know, those are programs, they have an end date to them, but how can they ultimately be institutionalized, like basically part of the green public procurement policies. So right now they're an incentive program, but how does that become business as usual, which is the goal, you know, in 5 years? So as an action item, maybe it's just looking at the bill and seeing which categories there are these programs and where we can basically create like a glide path for GSA to enhance its green public procurement.
So I've studied voluntary programs for about 25 years, and they have a role. So do pilot programs, but at some point you got to move beyond voluntary because you figured out what works. If we figure out what works, we need to think about how we raise the other ones up to the level of expectation that we really need them to move. So I punctuate what you said 100%, Anish. Challenge programs, incentive programs, et cetera, they're important, but if we're really serious about meeting net zero goals, we have to start getting serious about the policies to support them.
Yeah, just like a follow-up question on that. I was looking through the document in more detail, and there was some survey questions about the type of policies that prompted sustainable public procurement, and a lot of them were regulatory, but was there any insights on incentive programs that then, even after their end date became policy because they were effective?
We didn't ask about that. That's a great question, but we didn't ask about it.
Gotcha.
David, I see you're back.
Yes, apologies
it.
for stepping away. I don't know that I have any particular insight into this. I mean, we talk about regulations and policies and things like that. I have seen, elsewhere in the economy where a regulation was substituted with basically a management system and a certification. And I think we've talked about certifications for lots of things. I don't know if there's a management system standard for sustainable procurement policies or things like that. You raise a good point, Nicole, in your excellent presentation that I think there's a lot of planning. And so if you're familiar with management system, it's plan, do, check, and act. And there's lots of planning and doing, but the checking and acting is the harder part of it.
Yep.
And I don't know how we sort of build into the system that the checking and the acting, because I think that will move the needle. Whether that's sort of a regulatory requirement to do that, or there's some, for lack of a better word, voluntary way of doing that. There does need to be a driver. And the question is, what is the better mechanism to drive behavior? Because ultimately that's what we're talking about.
One of the burning questions I have related to this committee as a whole is that GSA ultimately, it looks like will be requiring climate action plans or climate risk plans. What do they do with them? What happens with those plans? Is just requiring a plan enough? Because if we're requiring improvements and we're requiring companies to demonstrate improvements, now we're engaging in measurement and monitoring and other things. But are we ready? Is the agency ready to dive into those details for all of its major contractors? I think this is a longer term priority that the GAP-FAC really needs to think about what happens with those plans. So yeah, EMSs, they've been around a long time and they offer many benefits, but they are all self-regulated, right? They're self-regulated, an organization puts it in place, they use it, they bend it in a way that makes sense for them, and there are advantages to that. We're talking now about creating transparency in this process by virtue of contractors submitting these climate action plans. This could be an enormous opportunity. The question is, what do we do with it?
Right. Those are excellent points. Let me reflect on what you're talking about, an EMS or a quality management system or a health and safety management system. They all have goals in them, and the whole point is to set goals and then try to meet them. But in the plan, there should be a part where you review what you did and then write some kind of review of, okay, we looked at everything that we did and we fell short here, here, and here, and here's how we're going to fix it. That's maybe the part that's missing from plans, is to check up on what we plan to do. I'm not an expert in that, but that was kind of my experience creating and running a management system standard program, was that whole way of thinking.
I would say there are a couple of issues associated with this. One is that they're founded on continual improvement. That's a requirement, but continual improvement could be that much. You could be very unambitious in your goals, but yet you're continually improving.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, to what extent is continual improvement expected? That's one, I think, elephant in the room. But the other is, what's the role of certification organizations? That they identify hotspots and areas for corrective action as part of their role. But that part of the process is not transparent and the results are not publicly released. And it's up to the organization to decide the extent to which they're going to manage this. Because certification bodies are paid for by the company, there's this principal agent problem here that if the certification body is too difficult on the company, they may not get the business from the company the next time around. So there's this strange dance taking place right now within management systems.
Agreed. At least for a few instances that I can think of, it was offered as the alternative to regulations where there wasn't a lot of enforcement either. So you have kind of problems in both spheres of in the management system voluntary space. There's perhaps the conflict of interest, or certainly dynamics that prevent progress. On the other hand, if you have a system, but there's no enforcement, there's no penalties, that doesn't work either.
And we're stepping into that with these climate action plans. What happens with them?
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, David. Really appreciate your time with us, Nicole. You're welcome to stick around. I think Steve might have one final question as he transitions to the next segment here. Steve?
So, and I don't know that we necessarily need this one answer today, but I'm dying to hear your reaction on this, because I think you bring a better comparative perspective than a lot of us do to this, who we tend to be focused on one market at a time. But in addition to saying thanks, it was wonderful, and I love the level of engagement, and I like some of the things that people talked about as difference between broad or narrow or macro or micro. If you were going to take a big step back and say, if I could choose one lever, what are the big ones? So my frustration often is, when we talk about this, it feels like an all hands on deck problem. We should be doing everything at once because of what we need to achieve. But if we were going to prioritize, we are focusing mostly on procurement. A lot of people say that procurement is great, but we really need to focus on the requirement generators who tell the procurement people what to buy. That's that whole program manager versus contracting officer tension. There's measurement and management. There's also leadership, and leadership can be political and it can be policy. But in your experience, if you were going to say, generally, what's the most effective place to start if we can't do everything at once? Any thoughts?
Yeah. First, I just want to clarify, when my vernacular is just different. I think of procurement as the entire acquisition life cycle. So I don't distinguish between, the tendering process and the physical exchange of money for product or service. But what has really echoed for me in the last year or so is this notion of making this as easy as possible. How do we do that? Because I think at the end of the day, the individuals who are in their roles, they want to do a good job. So let's help them do a good job. If the expectation is to embed sustainability into federal acquisition, how do we help them do a good job? And we should be focused, first and foremost, my opinion is, we should be focused on the ways in which we can automate this process, either through policy, through technologies, other mechanisms, to make it easy. Why don't we review sustainability criteria before an item goes into sam.gov? I mean, that would just streamline so many other things in the rest of the acquisition life cycle. So thinking about those really big levers that are out there, I think we're headed down the mandatory path already. We're seeing some of that. It remains to be seen what's going to happen from the proposed FAR ruling, but I think we're headed down that path. So that battle is getting fought. The question becomes, what are the next big levers?
I see Amlin has his hand up. Can you take one more, Nicole?
Sure, if you've got time, I've got time.
Thank you. And to add to that, looking at the entire procurement process, I think it's also crucial to think of the procurement decisions, how they're driven, as well as not just by what we're buying, but how that fits into the design. Because there is a lot of emphasis in embodied carbon right now, but if we don't emphasize how design decisions are being made and the impact of those design decisions being reflected into procurement, then all we're doing in some ways is reducing the long-term performance of our assets and, in a sense, just kicking the can down the road. So that I love what you just said in terms of thinking of procurement as not just a process, specific acquisition process, but also looking at it from the point of view of how design information, how design decisions affect procurement, because otherwise we're just essentially we could be buying really low carbon materials today and reducing embodied carbon, but in the long run, we won't be getting the performance that we need, and we'll have to go and procure over and over and over again and do more maintenance operations, and again over a life cycle.
Yeah, that's really not value for money procurement, is it?
For money. Correct. Exactly.
All
So,
right, thank you, Nicole. Yep, go ahead, Steve.
yeah, so Nicole, can't thank you enough for doing this. Really appreciate it. You know, like so many of us, the UNEP work is tremendously important, but getting the synthesis is also incredibly, incredibly helpful. I see that Boris has his hands up, so before I start making a lot of noise, I'm going to see what else Boris has to say.
No, I was just clapping.
And Nicole, before we let you run, does Boris or Stephanie have the slides you used?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
great.
good. I wanted to make sure they got
Yep.
through. The file was
Okay.
big.
We got it. We
Thanks
got
so
it.
much.
Everyone.
Thank
It's
you,
great
Nicole.
connecting. Yeah. Bye.
So I'm going to pivot briefly, consistent with our schedule, and hopefully I'm about to share, if I can make this work. I believe. Is that sharing now?
Yes, you are, sir.
Okay.
You got it.
Okay, so very, very briefly for the group, and none of this should come as a surprise to most of you, but some of you may not have seen it packaged this way, and we're just trying to move the ball along. So you should not take anything authoritative from the slides that I'm about to offer, but Luke and I, particularly with Boris and Stephanie, we're just trying to find a way to package everything. And one of the things that I want to communicate in just a moment is one of the things that we're really trying to do here is move relatively quickly. So if it feels like I'm pushing ahead, don't worry, there'll be plenty of time to discuss all these, but I just want to basically build a box before we're done today, because we'll be talking about these issues quite a bit going forward. Okay. I believe, as many of you know already, within our subcommittee of the larger committee, we have now formed a single-use plastics task force. And many of you know, since pretty much we got started, we have been asked to talk about issues related to single-use plastics. You won't see it in this slide deck, but while I'm speaking, let me also mention, many of you will recall one of the first pieces of correspondence we received was from 25 organizations speaking to PFAS. And that letter, you can find that in our shared drive, that's from December of 2022, but I think a lot of those issues get picked up here as well. But in any event, what we have informally agreed to as a group is to create this task force with an eye towards creating something in the form of recommendation with regard to single-use plastics. And again, remember, our scope is only GSA, but the concept is the task force would create a recommendation. The task force would bring that to the subcommittee would do what we need to do, bring it to the larger committee, and I'll come back to dates in just a moment. My understanding, and again, we have others here who can say more about this later, but my perception is the real driver behind all of this is the GSA believes, or many believe, that if we can do this with GSA, it could be a model where similar approaches might be adopted by other agencies. So our focus is on GSA for a number of reasons, but the grand aspiration is to do more. Now, a little bit of history. It's not that long ago, less than 3 months ago. Many of you will recall at one of our first public meetings, we had a presentation from a GSA representative who, as most of you know, is with us again today on single-use plastics. My goal is not to reiterate that here, but of course, like everything else in our work, you can go back and reference that slide deck in our shared folders. But again, pretty much what we're doing here is following that same thread throughout. Okay, so what are we trying to do here, or what have we somewhat agreed we're trying to do? Many of you will recall at the very beginning when GSA created us as a committee, they suggested that we think about our efforts at multiple tiers or levels. And one thing that they recommended was maybe generate a quick win or something that's a little bit easier early on, take on an interim project, and then maybe take on something a little bit or a lot longer term or more grand. I think, speaking for Luke and the task force, and I believe everybody on the subcommittee, this issue is very much intended to be our quick win. So this is not the ultimate statement. This is not the all-inclusive, but our sense is something would be better than nothing here. And the reason I think that's so important is because there's a lot of potential topics that could be in play. One of the things that I think is going to happen here is the more controversial issues are going to fall away. So in other words, if it's not relatively easy, if it's not the kind of thing that we can agree to by consensus, it's probably going to have to wait for another day. Okay, how does all that translate? The goal is for the task force to get through the subcommittee so that our subcommittee can present to the full committee at our May 4 public meeting a formal recommendation. And when we say formal recommendation, what we're talking about is something on the order of a 2-page letter. And for our planning purposes, I think we're going to impose the absolute maximum cap of 3 pages. But again, the aspiration is 2 pages. So again, nobody's going to be shocked by the fact that we're already in March. So less than 2 months from now, we would like the task force and the subcommittee to have something that we could present to the full committee at our May 4 public meeting, hopefully in the form of a 2 or possibly 3-page letter. Okay. Here's the laundry list of the things that could get into the letter. The things that you'll see in here, again, if you go back and look at the slide deck from GSA, nothing in here will surprise anyone. All of these things have been mentioned or discussed or referenced in at least one of our prior conversations. What we tried to do with this slide was try to get you to focus on the fact that we're not doing the entire universe and that there's a little bit of limitation and there's some things to focus on. So for example, the scope is not everything. Because the recommendation is going to GSA, we're not going to open the door to things that GSA doesn't necessarily buy. Does that mean it won't be helpful to a model to someone else? Again, we're going to have to make compromises if we can actually turn this into a recommendation in the next 2 months. Okay, so using a little bit of highlighting, one of the things that we think would be helpful is if we could focus on types of single-use plastics. We have consistently heard from GSA that shipping materials is a particular target of opportunity. Obviously, there's a lot of people in the public who are obsessed with straws. What we know from our shopping experience is plastic bags. But again, targets of opportunity in terms of types of single-use plastics.
Hey, Steve.
Oh, please.
Quick scope question. So packing materials, would this scope-wise, would this encompass packing materials that GSA buys for its own use, or would it encompass packing materials of suppliers selling to GSA, or both?
So Rich, what I most appreciate about your question is that this is what we have to figure out. So I may have a reaction to your question, but this is what the task group has to agree on, and then the committee does. So for example, if we can all agree that it should deal with the packing materials for things that GSA buys, but we can't agree on packing materials more broadly, we'll limit the scope. If we can go, okay, but I would say everything's in play here, but I think that's a really important point. And I want you to think in terms of that rubric for everything on the list, okay? All right. So other things, what are the alternatives? Saying that you can't use something if there's no alternative, obviously, is suboptimal. There are factors, or what we might think of as trade-offs or weighting. So what's worth it? What's the return on investment? And then, of course, particularly in light of the conversation that we had earlier today, there's this issue of specific goals. And one of the things that's interesting here is we do not have a predetermined set of ultimate or interim aspirations. And I really think it's great that Nicole reminded us there's the big goals at the end, but often the way things really get done is if you have phased approach or timelines or percentages. For those of you who are familiar with federal acquisition policy, it has been very, very common for the federal acquisition regulation to use phase-ins or implementation periods. So again, all of that's negotiable. And then, of course, potential language. All right. For anyone who hasn't seen this before, this is, again, just general information. Our intrepid but incredibly skilled, highly motivated, and unbelievably sophisticated all-volunteer task force is basically Jenny, Anish, and David, and they are burdened or supplemented, depending upon your perspective, by the committee co-chairs, Luke and me. So if you are interested in joining this intrepid band, you are welcome. You should let us know. But at least for the foreseeable future, this is our task force or working group. Okay.
Hey, Steve, just one point of clarification. So the entire subcommittee will have the opportunity to engage in the work, but this is to really make this happen. You really need a small core group to start pulling things together. But I did want to clarify for the entire subcommittee, so you will all have an opportunity.
And one of the things, again, we want to really keep emphasizing this. We're using the task force approach because we need something to get drafted so we can get to the subcommittee, so the subcommittee can get to the full committee. Thanks so much, Boris. Okay. One of the things that was really great in our conversations with GSA is they've already provided us with a fair number of read-aheads. What you see on your screen is a screenshot from one of the directories in our shared file. So there is the committee shared file. Within the committee file, there is the subcommittee shared file. And what you'll see now is that we also now have a task force shared drive. I love the fact that it is beautifully organized, but I did want to be relatively transparent about the fact that 3 of the 5 categories currently are empty, but we will be remedying that over the next couple of months. So if you go in there, what you're most going to be interested in are the resources and the drafting, but we'll be keeping track of everything else through this process. If you're in there, and remember, what I'm showing you on the screen is not live, these are just screenshots. The resources themselves, I'm sorry. Did I get my slides out of order? No, okay. All right, so there's resources. I do believe I may have gotten the slides out of order. I'm not quite sure what I've done. I'm gonna go forward for, oh no, I'm sorry. I apologize. So under resources, you then see that there's a suggested outline in there. We'll come back to that. But in addition, what you see is that the resources are broken down into 3 basic categories. For the most part, these are simply links at this point. But if you think there's information that we should be adding, by all means, please let us know. Okay, in addition, this is hot off the press. So as we were pulling this presentation together, I hadn't seen this yet, and a number of people in our community have been sharing this just in the last 48 hours, but you may be interested in a new resource which just became available called U.S. Plastic Pacts PCR toolkit. And again, there may be information that's relevant in here, but what you'll see is this is a pretty robust website, but we wanted to include it in the slide deck because when we were assembling the information that's posted on the shared file, we didn't have access to this just yet. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to do, and again, this is where we really start focusing here, is if at this point you were in the shared drive, we actually have a suggested outline where we're getting started. So I'm going to go back to that in just a moment, but in the time that we have available, other than opening the floor up for discussion and questions, the real questions are, how do we go forward? The task force hopefully is going to be meeting very, very soon. As Boris reminded us, everyone is welcome to provide input. The goal is to get a preliminary working draft to the subcommittee as soon as possible, with that critical eye, again, focused on that early May deadline. So I'm going to stop sharing if I can figure that out. You would think at this point in my Zoom life, I should know how to do this already, but what have I done?
I think you have to go to the top screen and there's a button up there.
Did it stop? No. This is actually quite interesting. Ah, I've got it now. I think I have it.
We see your desktop, Steve. There we go.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, I've way too many screens open. Okay. So I've been talking for a
Relatively
while.
clean desktop, so that's impressive.
One of my multiple screens. But again, let's just open it up for discussion, questions, comments, or the like. And again, a little frustrating that we don't have Jenny with us today for the discussion, but.
Yeah, Jenny's right here.
Oh, she's here.
Yeah,
Okay.
she's got her hand up.
Excellent. Let's start with Jenny.
Yes, sorry, I've been here for the last 40 minutes or so. I was late to the meeting, but very happy that I made it in time for this part. I wasn't sure when that would be. So I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this so far, because I had it on my list of things to do to start to brainstorm about structure. And so really happy to see that that has already been done. So I happy to really start to move this forward. I know that we've been contemplating moving forward for quite a while. So really interested in hearing about kind of what next steps as far as, I guess, the task force group. I'm happy to start suggesting edits to this document to keep us moving along, and then maybe and I navigated my way there through the Google Drive. But yeah, and then figuring out.
Could I ask one quick question? Again, and Jenny, I'm speaking to everybody here, but would it be helpful for us to put this document up on the screen? Boris could share the document, or Stephanie or something like that. And then we could actually talk to it that way, or is it better to have the conversation without the document filling the screen? I defer to others.
I feel like having a document would be helpful. We're hearing and seeing.
And oh, here it comes. So did you want to get us started, Jenny?
Sure. So I think I was planning to go back to the original source materials from Adina to really take a step back and look at, what GSA has considered in the context of their ANPR, and what are the biggest questions, and where could GSA make the most impact. So I think one of the things we would ask GSA to start to take action on and what are the information points to be gathered.
So Jenny, would you like me to stop sharing to lessen any confusion, or
No, maybe we could, Steve, do you want to walk us through, or Steve or Luke? I'm not sure who put together this outline, but I think it's really helpful. So maybe do you want to go through that first, and then I can talk about what I see as next steps. But if you want to talk about
So
what's on the screen so far.
I guess to the extent that folks haven't looked at it before, and Boris or Stephanie, could you just grab the view and maybe increase it a little bit and then scroll with us so it's filling a little bit more of the screen? Okay, so if you haven't seen the document before, again, not rocket science and not filled out, this is very much what I would call a discussion or starting point. So what you see here is a little bit of background and then introduction. So again, I'm highly disinclined to read the document at this point, but you see that we have purpose and overview. Okay, so then the next phase of the document, just so you know what's coming, it's not terribly long. The recommendations are basically broken down into what I would call 4.5 bullets, the last one being a conclusion. And, you know, interestingly enough, you could mix and match these any way you want, but there's really nothing else in the document other than the list itself. So for anybody who hadn't seen it before, you've now seen it, and I'm going to turn it back to Jenny then.
Great. So for those of you who I don't know, I do have a background in plastic pollution reduction legislation prior to coming to EPA, and then at EPA, my focus as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Pollution Prevention is really on how I'm looking at reduction. And so I think I can bring that eye to this document and suggest targeted ways for GSA to go about moving forward with this work. And so I'm happy to start to take a pen to this document. But I do want to talk with the task force members about whether, it makes sense for me to kind of get in there now, and so they can, or if we all 3 task force members would like to add edits at the same time, the beauty of such a document. And then we can start to, I think, have our regular meetings, and then also solicit whether, whether others want to join the party as well, whether others want to take part in the task force activities. But I think you've set up a really good structure to start that work. But David or Nish?
Let's go with Anish and then David.
Yeah, thanks for putting together this outline. It's really helpful to kind of structure our next steps for the work. I would say that where I would lean in more heavily is on the challenges, solutions, and benefits section that's under the recommendations, and maybe I think that's an area where I can kind of provide more value. And then before we get there, though, I also, similar to Jenny, just wanted to go back to the source material that Adina provided and make sure that we comb through all of the different ideas that she's already sourced, so we make sure we capture that. So I'll transfer over some ideas on that, but Jenny, I'll let you kind of lead, I guess, in terms of those pieces, since you're really the expert in the room.
I think we're all experts. That's why we're all here. And I know you have a background in life science and LCAs as well. So I think that's really helpful as far as the, I think that section in particular. So that makes sense.
David?
Yes, thank you. And I'll echo, first, thank you for putting this together. And I'll echo Jenny and Anisha's comments so far. One thing I think, at least I'm struggling with, and maybe others are too, is I don't really know where we're starting from. We can talk about approaches to reducing waste, or however we're articulating this, whether it's sustainability, reducing waste, which are not necessarily the same thing. And we can talk about it theoretically, such as reduce, reuse, recycle. There's a whole hierarchy we can articulate, and I think it's fairly well known. And to the extent that there's already the comprehensive purchasing guide that EPA has, we're already somewhat down the road on identifying, products that are more sustainable. I guess the question is, it's hard to be, at least in my thinking, be specific when I don't know what has happened and where maybe the pressure points are. We've talked about, how much does the government GSA spend on waste management and actually disposal of things versus, say, recycling of things, if that is kind of one of the tools that we have. And what are the kinds of things that are being procured? It would be helpful, in my view, to be more specific rather than to lay out a theoretical framework and say, go apply it, which I don't think is actually very helpful.
I will just respond to one part of that, at least, is that I know that from Adina's kind of overview, one of the issues, I think from the earlier question as well, I think it was from Rich, was kind of, is this particularly for shipping, because I think that shipping materials are a big part of this, is that GSA is concerned with the amount of money that they're having to pay for hauling and to a certain extent recycling, but mostly hauling of materials that are being sent, the shipping materials that are received at GSA owned buildings. And so that's one of the things. And so I think regardless of the exact quantity, reducing the amount of waste that's being generated that is redundant to some extent. So I think that there are certain things that we can look at now, and then also things that we can ask for, GSA to spend time getting more specifics. But I think there are some things that we can move forward with now that we know are an issue. I think that they see that as an issue, that redundant materials that they're having to pay for disposal of within their own facilities, but then also a concern of excess shipping materials that are being shipped out by GSA as well. So I think we have a place to start with some parts of it, at least.
Yeah, let me reflect on that. And thank you, Jenny, for reminding me of what Adina said, and certainly the context of that. Maybe it would be for regular suppliers, maybe there can be some reverse logistics set up, which could address some of that in sort of reusable packaging that will go back on the reverse logistics side of it. Mm-hmm. But there's also, for the incidental ones, I don't know how many manufacturers have metrics for how much packaging is used to make sure that their product is delivered intact, without damage, without other kinds of things. Whether that information is readily available, or we can encourage GSA to encourage manufacturers to consider that if they haven't already.
Yeah, and I think having GSA's help in identifying certain things that could make, could lead to really impactful work if there are opportunities for reusable shipping containers and things like that from regular purchases. But I think, I think we have a place to start, and then maybe some questions to ask that can get us even further along.
I agree with that. Thank you.
So Luke and I had spoken earlier, and one of our goals today was to not just to return to the Jamboard and recreate prior experiences. So if I could just add a little bit of, where we are, and I don't want to impose too much pressure, but it would help us all if we heard the clock ticking in the background, okay? So in terms of timing, the sooner you can take at least a moment and go into this document, take a look at it, and some of the other resources. I believe that the task force would welcome your input in any way, shape, or form. If you want to put comment bubbles on some of these issues to talk about things that you think they should think about, if you want to suggest text or suggest deletions, suggest reorganizations, by all means. So let's, for now, you've seen the starting point. Jenny has the primary pen, but we welcome any input you have, but the task force is going to start working relatively quickly. In addition, there's a lot of resources available that you may or may not find interesting, and if you'd like to supplement them, we would welcome that. If you find a resource that you think shouldn't be in there, and you feel like you haven't conquered the Google Drive and you want that in there, you can email that to Boris or to Stephanie or me, and we'll get it in there, okay? But if you think that there are things that we should be looking at that we're not, please let us know. So again, as soon as possible, please take a look at this particular document, take a look at the other stuff in there, and let us know whether there's anything you'd like us to be thinking about in that regard. Now, I want to
Hey,
change.
Steve,
Oh, please.
one thing I wanted to bring Stephanie in the conversation just now, because she's helping kind of pull things together. So I don't know, Stephanie, would there be anything that would be helpful going forward, just to kind of help the path? Yeah.
I think Stephen and Luke have touched on it. You know, all of the bullets on this document are not all inclusive. That is something that you all will have to decide on what you want to touch. But again, as Steve has already stated, this is just a starting point, and hopefully, as Nicole mentioned, something to help make things easier and to jettison the process. So no, I think Luke and Steve have it on point. They're on it.
Jenny, please.
I think, you know, what would help me move along, I think I like deadlines. And so I think maybe setting a date for a meeting of the task force, and then having comments in before that meeting, I think would be helpful to have a date for myself.
And unless I hear otherwise, I'm kind of hoping that Boris or Stephanie will facilitate a scheduling of the task force, hopefully in the next week or so.
Yes, and Stephanie will take that one up.
Yeah, we'll make sure to coordinate that.
Great.
Okay. So then I want to change gears and just remind everyone what else we have. So you may recall, again, I don't want to go back to the Jamboard today, but you may recall that this is now our short-term, quick win, first initiative, modest, fast, hard deadline, first week of May. The next thing that we've informally agreed to as a group is something related to the electronic tools, the information technology, and the like. And think about all the themes that we kept hearing again today. The SF tool, the GSA, environmental aisle, maybe some artificial intelligence, maybe cooperative purchasing, make it stupid easy, all these things to basically bring the tools together. And Boris and Stephanie are finding us GSA expertise, so you should expect to be hearing and seeing them at future meetings. So if you're thinking about those issues, great. And personally, I would suggest if you haven't spent time yet on the SF tool, we've had presentations on it. If you are unfamiliar with the GSA Federal Supply Schedule, environmental aisle, go ahead and take a look at it, play with it. You know, go shopping for something that you know something about, and you'll see that it's powerful but clunky. And again, you'll start to see the issues we're trying to address. Okay.
Please, Steve, if I could add a little bit on our conversations within GSA. So you're right. So I have conversations with Katie Miller and Brennan Conway, who are both from the Federal Acquisition Service. Katie's the senior advisor for sustainability within FAC. And she's spoken to our group a couple of times, as has Brennan. So there is definitely an interest on the idea of integration. It's not the first time that's been suggested. So right away, their first step is let's find the experts that are behind the scenes running these systems. For example, GSA Advantage, SF Tool, and so on and so forth. So there's already some thoughts going on within GSA. So there is, I want to say there's an appetite for this. And these are the people that would really love to hear from the GAFA and say, hey, we think this is a really good idea, because the stuff they've been working on for years to try to make these systems easier to use will just be a tremendous amount of momentum for them to hear. So I want to put that in perspective. And then the other thought is, when we had this conversation, I was going to call on you, Rich, a little bit, because when we started talking about it, I thought I heard Rich expressing an interest in, you know, maybe this is another task force that you form at some point. And perhaps, you know, Rich could be the guy that kind of takes the ball forward. No, not to single you out, Rich. But anyway, and maybe would you want to be part of those conversations as we start talking to the experts at GSA?
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
And then,
back to you, Steve.
yeah, and then just remember, so we have our first short-term issue, we have our next larger issue, and then we have some broader issues as well. And so one thing, and I think Boris just gave us a perfect setup on that, at least so far, the model that I think we're moving in the direction of is within the committee, we would create task forces. And so if you think that you are interested in the IT, making it easier, the integration, the simplification, let us know. That'll be the next task force we form. And then we have some other broader issues as well. And those are the ones that tend to probably overlap a little bit more with the acquisition workforce subcommittee and the like. But again, that's what we're doing now, next, and down the road. But again, let us know what you're thinking. Thoughts, Luke?
Yep. I could have captured it better, Steve. I guess the one, we should be cognizant of deadlines, right? We have two public meetings and 2 administrative meetings before May 4th. So the path to a recommendation is going to be quick. I mean, we're going to have to, and maybe we don't get to a full one, or we bite off, we don't bite off the whole thing. I'm not quite sure, but it is, it's every bit as urgent. And I think, Steve and I kick ourselves in between these meetings. How do we get from point A to point B? How do we connect the dots between the work at the last meeting, and how do we take it a step forward to get to the next meeting? And we want your input on that. What do you need to hear so that you feel comfortable and that you're at a point where you think you have the knowledge to make a recommendation? And so I think the I guess it's a focus group, or a panel of SMEs and experts that's being put together on the acquisition tools. That's great, because I think that'll fill in a lot of the blanks for a lot of the knowledge on this committee. But what else do we need to get there for those other recommendations?
And look, let me add that we don't have to wait for the admin or the public meeting. We could have those discussions as soon as, we don't have to wait for those meetings. We can make them happen sooner than that.
Great. That's great.
Go ahead, Jenny. Sorry.
I would say that one thing, I've spent quite a bit of time with SF Tool and other tools and talking with people, and I think it's good to, have a lot of conversations there. But I also think it would be really good, I think, for this subcommittee to identify best practices that are in current use outside of the federal government. And federal government is not the most nimble. And I think either at the state level or at private industry, who has this figured out? What are the best examples? As far as tech tools, it's not my area of expertise in particular, the tech part of it, but I think it would be good to hear from other leaders in that area.
Totally agree. And I think we heard the name Jenny Wolf floated before as somebody in Massachusetts who has perhaps done an overlay of data on sustainability tools. And so that, I think.
Yes,
Yep,
I'm sorry. I keep jumping. I feel like I'm running your meeting today. My apologies. So Nicole is bringing that lady to the acquisition workforce subcommittee. So that's in the plans for them. So she's planning to come to one
Wonderful.
of the acquisition workforce subcommittees. Yeah,
that's great.
She knows her.
That's great. And so and maybe the counterbalance to that, and we can do some digging. Thank you for the suggestion. Is the private sector. How is the private sector approaching this? And that's should be fairly easy to find, but we can do some digging on that. So thank you. That's a good point.
And to Luke's point, and Boris and Stephanie will correct me if I've messed up the dates, but we're on a 3-week cycle now. And so our next 2 public meetings are March 30 and April 20. It's always possible I've messed that up. But as a task force, our interim goal until we fail is to bring a discussion draft for the March 30 meeting. And hopefully based on that meeting, the task force will, again, cull the things we can't do and see if there's something that we might be able to get consensus on with minor deviations on the April 20th meeting, so that we could be ready for the first week of May. If we can't do it, we can't do it. But to Jenny's point, most of us work best when we're working to deadlines, or as we say, as the sword of Damocles descends upon us from above. Boris and Stephanie, and maybe Skylar, as far as I can tell, I think we've chased away all of the public observers today.
Yeah,
but if one of you want to formally ask, by all means.
Yeah, just the opportunity. I don't see anyone, so I think we're good there.
Okay, so look, we're almost at time anyway. We've done a lot of talking today. I don't know about you all, but I thought listening to Nicole was great, and having Nicole be part of this community is just one of the many, many great things about the whole effort generally. But in the time remaining, anybody else want to raise anything, questions, comments, suggestions? And I'm sorry, David has suggested that he has other things going on in life, and the answer to that is no, you don't. I'm sorry, just kidding. And if nobody else has anything else, I'm gonna look at Luke, and he's not shaking no, so I'm gonna turn it back over to Stephanie and Boris. Thanks, everybody.
All right, great meeting again. And yes, exciting times. We're putting pen to paper, love it. I feel like we've done a lot here today, and we're just going to continue on. Feel free to engage. Just an FYI, we will be sending more information about the May 4th meeting, the travel package. So that's coming together. I think David in my team, he's been working with our team here. So you should be seeing that pretty soon. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I just saw Mark's camera go back on. And so, Mark, in the spirit of Boris nominating Rich to do something, my feeling is you're going to be an important player for us on this IT issue if we're going to make the ask on broadening schedule access through cooperative purchasing. So it seems to me that having a state voice is an extremely compelling addition to that. So, again, we won't ask too much of you, but I expect you're going to be voluntarily recruited for that task force as well.
Thank you, Steve. I can weigh in on that too. I know what we did with artificial intelligence, or at least the plan, so we can talk more.
Perfect. Great. Well, if there's nothing else, I will adjourn this meeting today. And thanks everybody for coming. Great deal. All right.
Thank you all.